I do think it's safe to say that Resident Evil 6 wasn't everyone's cup of tea. I am Couch Coop, and we're going to be looking at the PlayStation 5 version of RE7, which was given to us free and it went past my radar, so it's time to look. This is RE8 in the background, a game that sports ray tracing and pretty damn high resolution. It's a bit of a looker. RE6 is actually the last of the local co-op Resident Evil games also.
Actually, I think you'll find that Resident Evil Revelations was the last installation of local co-op from that series. Wrong. October, so just by a few months. This, we're slowly getting there, is Resident Evil 7 on my PlayStation 4 Pro VR, and it was like 720p. It was a very impressive game, but it was extremely grainy. That original PSVR had some issues with very slight amount of peripheral blurring. It sort of came with the territory. It was early in modern VR systems. That sort of brings me on to why this game is looking like it does in first person, opposed to something like 6 or 5. The series, after that initial release of 6, was in loads of trouble. No one liked it. They desperately had to change that format up, and I think that first person, more creepier story driven content was the only way forward. Did, however, welcome that RE4 remake format with open arms. And I feel that RE8, although it looks stunning, isn't true Resident Evil heritage for me. It's a great game, and 7 also, but it was just something new. The direction was really welcomed by the fans, to be fair. Let's look at it. What do we get with the PlayStation 5? Well, for the first time in months, I'm genuinely reviewing a legitimate PlayStation 5 game, i.e. not backwards compatibility. This sits on the SSD, and we get 60 frames per second, ray traced shadows and good new volumetric light. The textures are still the same, but it is 4K, so we cannot moan at those specs. That's pretty good, and this costs nothing. If you own the disc, you'll get the PlayStation 4 download prompt, but also an offer to put it on SSD under official PlayStation 5 banner. So really good news that it doesn't cost anything, and actually genuinely impressed with these specs. First time through with that VR, it was all about the immersion that kind of took over. You weren't really concentrating on textures or how jagged a lot of edges seemed to look. It was just a horrifying game. It was one of the best terrifying PlayStation VR titles. This and Rush of Blood was really good, and it came out pretty early in the life cycle of that system, and it also had a non-VR mode, which I'd never bothered looking at. So this is where the surprise came in, doing some nice pans, looking at that light, hitting some of these scenes differently, and just an incredible amount of detail. This house has had a lot of work done on it. When you look at it under a microscope, there's not one panel, wall or chair that hasn't got a bit of age, a bit of mould, a bit of crap on it. Talking of crap, pretty sure a bit nearly flew out of my backside during this lovely encounter. Does VR change much with this game? Yeah, it does. And it's a strange title because I think under the surface it was genuinely designed from the ground up to promote that PSVR headset. This was one of the bigger AAA titles. You had rigs coming out, and this is a little bit like the sort of Jaws 3D, where the film is made with the 3D era in mind, so when it's watched on a flat screen TV, scenes just seem ridiculous and pointless. There's stuff with this where it's all about stuff being in your face, knives being waved around, characters getting right up there, sudden jump scares, anything that ruins your intimacy and sort of ruffles your feathers on a VR level was used. So that is very telling when you're playing this on a flat screen TV. This game is also extremely linear and heavily story driven, so I've been very careful about showing the front end. Maybe one boss, it's difficult because the stages are all surrounding the family members and everything points to sort of different reveals about the story, which I happen to think is absolutely awesome. It incorporates an almost insectoid hive angle. I won't ruin too much, but it's exactly what you think it is. Absolutely terrifying stuff. Just back to that VR, non-VR issue I was talking about. I think if you got to this game and never looked at its VR modes, you would take it on face value as a pretty semi-decent Resident Evil game. It just comes in at a new angle. You still got all the weapons, all the crafting, but there's just a whole new array of characters. Everything's just had a facelift, but in a good way, if that makes sense. This was a very welcomed, brand new Resident Evil experience, VR or no VR.
What? Want me to know?
Before I forget, back to that intro, that was lifted directly from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and there's just an identical scene in this game. Even the squabble, even where the dad's sitting, it's pretty parallel. And you also see loads of Blair Witch references with people facing the walls, dark, dingy cellars. It's pretty damn cool on the horror reference front. Also got my first takedown strike. Can you believe this? From this game. I got it early. I was out in Dubai and I tried to capture footage and it was like, no, you're not allowed to do this at this stage. So I filmed it off screen on VR, put it on YouTube, went down to the pub. I'm sitting in the middle of Al Barsha somewhere and I'm like, I'm just going to check how that video's doing. Bang! Channel down, like 3 or 4 day ban, Capcom official. I absolutely crap myself.
Better start running.
Back to that linear thing, this game does have some surprises. If you've played this, you'll be aware of this fight. It's at the front end. I'm not ruining too much. It's hilarious getting chased around this tiny garage by the father. He's a real certified lunatic and one of my more favourite characters in the whole game. Anyway, you can get the keys and you can get in and run him over. I was looking at walkthroughs of this because I was dying constantly. I'm thinking, where do I hide? Where do I stand? Do I waste my ammo on him? And I could just get in and mow him down. This was not done by myself on my first playthrough. So the game offers as much alternative solutions to problems as it can, I think. And if you look at walkthroughs, you can do things a lot of different ways. The puzzles aren't always solved on face value, so it's definitely scored some points there. It's lost some points on having one of the worst police-civilian interactions I've ever had the misfortune to listen to in a video game. It's worse than some of the Resident Evil 2 stuff. That cop is an absolute plum, and of course the guy doesn't even tell him what's going on. They have the most unmeaningful conversation through a window. It drives you completely mad.
Welcome to the family, son.
I want to spend a little bit of time looking at these interiors and some of this light. After playing Resident Evil 8, it's really difficult to sort of look at this and be impressed because of how visually dominant that game is. I mean, I put it on par with the RE4 remake with just flat out amazing visuals. This, with its added new lighting angle and some slight increase on frame rates and definitely resolution, and because I've only been to it on VR, it does kind of look like a different Resident Evil game for me. The update mentions haptic implementation or DualShock or something like that, and there's absolutely nothing on the pad. I think that PlayStation 5 pad is probably one of the most underused pieces of technology in that whole array of hardware. I think it's ridiculous. I think Returnal and GT7 are the only ones where I've actually felt genuinely good haptic feedback. Maybe Horizon Forbidden West also. The game sports some sort of flash forwards and backs via a VHS system, and this gives you a sort of linear effect, film grain, and it doesn't look that great once you up this resolution. That was the only thing that took me back a bit. I was surprised they didn't increase the fidelity on that, but I think that's part and parcel. It's trying to look sort of 80s and retro even, but that one was quite noticeable for me against how stunning all of these other visual additions appear to be.
What the?
The DLC for this I've heard very good things about, and you get this like teaser trailers for it all the time, and there's more guns, machine guns, and a certain recognisable character makes an appearance. I would one day love to get the chance to check that out, and I know that there's someone listening out there with a PlayStation 5 and PlayStation VR 2 and Resident Evil 4. They're like, mate, you've got no idea what you're in for when you fire that game up with that headset on. Hopefully next year the channel might do a bit better. Obviously I don't have as much disposable income as I used to, so getting this expensive hardware is a bit difficult. I will put a Patreon in the link. Any support for this channel is massively welcome. And of course I have been Couch Coop, and I will see you down there.